Ryan, my brother.
Ejay, what's going on, my brother?
Dude, thanks for coming to Eastvale, to the Parable Studio to sit down and chat with me, man. I appreciate you so much, man.
No, I appreciate you, bro. This is nice. Like, it smells good. Just so if you don't listen to this podcast, if you do listen to this podcast, just know this studio is nice, man. I got to give it to you, EJ.
I appreciate it, man. I was just telling him how, like, dude, like, there's so many distractions here sometimes, but, we got to make the best of it. And, this is a controlled environment, so what can I say?
I love it, man. I love it. Thanks for having me, bro.
Dude, so like I told you kind of off camera, there's been a lot of requests to have you on the Parables. And, I'm very selective on who I choose, but I love everything that you're doing. One, I may arguably have the best dancer in Chino.
Oh, man.
I specifically also wore these J's just for this episode. And he didn't wear his J's, so man, what's going on with that?
That's because it's wet outside, so I got to keep the J's dry. Yeah. And, man, as far as the dancing ability, man, that's just my twin brother, as I like to say.
Your brother. I love it, man. And, I'm just... Again, I'm very grateful to have you here. You're doing some amazing work in your community. And it's very interesting because this episode, I will say, will be the most unique in that, the Parables is actually in the business category. Mm-hmm. And, we have all, like I just told you, like we have all walks of life that come here, right? I bring on people who are massively successful, who tell their story, everything leading up to where they are today, to people who I feel who haven't had their voice heard yet, who are doing some incredible things within their local community, maybe who are not so much in the public eye. Yeah. But really, I got to say, like, again, I'm a big fan of your work. In fact, I have had a few guests here who are in the same line of duty, and I'll be glad to link you guys up after.
Very cool.
But let's start off. So this podcast, I really like to call it to be a beacon of light for people to take something away from our conversation. Obviously, we're going to be diving into your work and some of your input and your insight on what's going on in today's society. But let's get to know you a little bit, kind of how you got into what you do today, and go from there.
Perfect, man. So a little bit about me is, I'll just get the white elephant out of the room. You already know this, but for the listeners, I am a police officer by day, and I'm a business owner by night. And so, man, it's funny, man. I had no aspirations of being a police officer, like, at all. Like, I grew up in Rialto, San Bernardino area, went to Rialto High School, graduated from there in 2005, and then I went on to University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and played football there on a football scholarship. And so while I was in college, man, I had aspirations of being an entrepreneur. Like, I wanted to be a business owner. So I got my degree in marketing and business, and fast forward, I met my wife actually while I was in Vegas. She's from out here, but I met her while I was out there. We met, and then shortly after that, I ended up moving back to California. We got married. I was helping take care of my father who's sick. And when that happened, man, like, I was working for Abercrombie & Fitch as a manager at a retail store, and I couldn't stand working at that place.
You worked there?
Yeah, bro.
Man,
yeah,
I can't picture that, man.
Nah, man, I couldn't stay, bro. If I ever get cancer from that the cologne that they spray every 15 minutes, bro,
I'm
gonna get that lawsuit, bro. Like, I say, if you worked at Abercrombie & Fitch for the last 15 years, but you might be entitled to a lawsuit. But yeah, so I worked there, and then I actually worked for Primerica, the insurance company. Yeah. I was doing insurance and investments for a while. But it's funny, man, I always had aspirations to just run my own business. So I had like tons of business ideas, tons of them. And every single time I would try to start, I would continue to start, and then I would get shot down. I would continue to start and get shot down, but I would make it further and further each time. But I also found myself getting more discouraged each time because I'm like, man, nothing is successful. So fast forward, my dad's friend was like, Ryan, you should become a police officer. And I was like, man, I have no aspirations of becoming the man, the popo, the pig. Like, that was my mentality, just because I was disrespected multiple times by cops when I was younger, and so was my family. So when he told me that, I was like, man, I'm not about to do that. And so I'm a Christian man. So I was like, let me just pray about it. And I talked to my wife, and so I was like, if this is what God wants me to do, I'll do it. If it's not, then I won't. So
around what age were you at this time?
I was, I think I was 24 around that time. So
was he in law enforcement?
Yeah, he was a captain. He was a captain, local. And so he was up there in the top of the ranking structure. And so he was on me for like 2 years about trying to do it. Like, my dad would always say, hey, my friend hit me up again today. Like, he's asking about you. I'm like, man, I'm good. Like, I ain't trying to do that. So, my wife had got pregnant with our first son, and I was still doing insurance. And it was funny because she was working full time at the time. And so she would go to work, and then she'd come home, and then she'd be like, what have you been doing all day? And I would tell her, I've been out there hustling and doing my thing. Realistically, I was at home watching like the Spartans or whatever it may be, like, eating Cheetos and top ramen. And so I was like, man, I can't keep doing this, man. I got a son on the way. And so I said, you know what, if this is what God wants me to do, it'll be. If it's not, it won't. So I prayed that prayer, man, and the doors just kind of flew open to law enforcement. And so the unique thing about it is, you know, typically anybody that wants to get into law enforcement, you know, it's very difficult. It's very challenging because there's a lot of different things that you have to go through in order to get hired. And so for me, though, it was kind of quite the contrary. Like, it was effortless. Like, I actually got to choose between what agency I wanted to work for. And so if that wasn't God trying to tell me, like, this is what I want you to do, then I don't know what was.
Yeah.
But I still felt like, man, I don't know if this is what I want to do. So went to the academy, graduated the academy, came home, did my training program. Still felt like, man, I don't know if this is what I want to do. Every time I pulled somebody over, I felt like I was just messing with people. I was like, man, I hate pulling people over. I feel like I'm messing with them.
You felt like you had a burden or maybe a guilt?
Yeah, I felt like guilt. I felt guilty. I felt like I was just disturbing people's peace. And so, but it wasn't until I got off on my own that I realized the need for what it is that we do. And I realized, like, you know, there are quality of life issues that exist, and if nobody addresses them, then who will? Yeah. And so that was right around the time that Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and the whole town went up in flames. Like, they picketed, they boycotted, they lit the place on fire. And that kind of got me thinking, because I had a discussion with my mother. My mom was like, I wonder if my son would have did the same thing as that officer if he was put in that officer's shoes. And she was like, you know, he probably would have. But I know my son is a loving son, a loving husband. And so that kind of got my wheels turning. And it got me to realize, like, the only reason my mom is saying that now is because her pumpkin, that's what she calls me, her pumpkin is a police officer.
So now she's like worried.
Exactly. She's worried. And at the same time, she knows, like, I'm not out there trying to kill nobody for no reason. And so that's when the ball started spinning in my head. I was like, well, what if people just start seeing the human side of what police officers do and who they are as human beings? Then maybe they might have a little bit more empathy when we go out there and do our job. And so that was the birth of Breaking Barriers United. And so, you know, here I am 4 years later, man, and the business that we have is outrageous. And so to say, like, you know, I told you at the beginning, like, you know, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. When I became a police officer, I thought those dreams were over. But little did I realize it was just the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, it seems like both of those worlds are colliding, actually, in regards to, you know, you started this organization, which is kind of in the line of duty of what you're doing already. So that's awesome, man. And, you know, you're obviously doing some amazing things within the community. You know, I'm very curious to know from your perspective, because, you know, this is a massive work that you're doing, huge impact. You know, where do you think the problem really stems from? Like, where did it kind of all start, you think?
So a lot of people don't realize, man, and I didn't realize until I became a police officer, but, you know, there are some deep-rooted issues in our country that stem from slavery, that stem from civil rights. And, you know, if you go really back into the history books, you'll find out that, you know, slave patrol was started in order to go out and basically capture slaves and bring them back to their plantations. And so that was a form of government within our country. And so if you look at that form of government and what we have as policing today now, which is to go out there and enforce laws, a lot of people like to tie the two together and say, hey, look, you know, law enforcement is derived from slave patrol. And in some actuality, there may be some truth to that. But the thing that people don't realize is that since then, law enforcement has completely evolved and completely changed. Just the mere fact that I'm a minority that can be a police officer tells you that there's a lot of change. And so, unfortunately, sometimes we live in a society where people like to continue to live in the past and don't want to acknowledge that we need to change in order to move forward in the future. And so that's where I'm kind of at now as a police officer, as a black police officer. I see both sides of it. I'll never forget where I come from, and I'm always going to remember the person that I was before I became a police officer. But now that I'm the one that also enforces laws, takes people to jail, takes people's rights away, essentially when I'm on, you know, doing some type of enforcement action, I understand the flip side of it. And so I think there's a lot of deeper rooted issues that people need to understand in order to understand why, you know, there's so much hostility in law enforcement with the community at this point.
Do you think it's definitely you know, miseducation? There's a lack of perspective.
100%. And the only reason I can say that is because my perspective was different. So before I became a police officer, my perspective was, you know, guys only became police officers to get because they got picked on in high school, so they became police officers so they could pick on everybody else. Like, that was my perspective.
Let's elaborate on that, because I remember you just said that initially you didn't want to be a police officer. You
Mm-hmm.
already had your image
Mm-hmm.
of, police officers, pigs, or whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it. What was, I mean, did something happen when you were younger,
So
or was this?
so I had a few run-ins. I had a few run-ins where officers would hit me up and say if I fit the description of somebody that was suspicious in the area.
Gotcha.
I've had situations where I was driving through a neighborhood just looking at houses, and as an entrepreneur yourself, like one of the things that I like to do is I like to look at things that give me inspiration or give me something to aspire to. So I've always been like that. I've always, it's ingrained in you when you're younger. Like when you're in kindergarten, they tell you to daydream and think about what you want to do. So I still do it as an adult. And there were times where I would be, just driving through a nice neighborhood, and it wasn't like I was in a, beat up car. And even if I was, it shouldn't matter. But I had a off-duty guy to come up to me one time and say, "Hey, I don't belong in that area." And if I didn't leave the area, he was going to call somebody and have them arrest me. And I'm like, who are you to tell me that I need to leave the area just because you feel like I don't belong here? So that was a couple things. And then I had some family members who had been pulled over multiple times, said they fit the description of armed robbery suspects, handcuffed, car search, and then really not explained why it occurred. So those were the only really interactions I had with law enforcement, and they were negative.
They were all bad.
Exactly. And so if that's your only perception of it, then how could you expect me to have a positive outlook on law enforcement? You know what I mean? And then when I did see law enforcement doing something positive in the community, to me, it felt like it was only a dog and pony show just to cover up for all the shadiness that was going on. So that's kind of what my belief was prior to law enforcement.
When you got into law enforcement, did you automatically, I mean, you said you saw the good side of law enforcement at that time. Did you still see bad also? Like, was there, like, obviously your mind shifted a little bit. This is your career now, and then this is all what you describe God's work now. Was there also you still saw a lot of issues on the law enforcement side? Obviously, there's a problem with society and the media and things like that. Was there still problems on the law enforcement side?
So I wouldn't say I saw a lot of problems, and I think that's the first place we got to start there, is because a lot, we've always been, ingrained in us to assume that there's this huge issue within law enforcement, and I'll be the first one to say it's not as big as people think. I mean, I don't care what profession it is. I mean, we can turn on the TV and see a teacher who just got done molesting a student. Yeah. I mean, you can turn on the TV and see a doctor who just got arrested for malpractice.
I was just going to say I could speak on behalf of the nursing profession.
Exactly. So I don't care what it is, but the only reason we get a lot of the attention is because it sells. And as a marketing major, I can go back and tell you from the School of Journalism, like, hey, people are looking for hot articles. And so anytime you see an article that comes out, white officer shoots black man or whatever it may be, immediately is going to gain steam. And so you assume that there's this huge problem, but realistically there's not. So the first thing I realize is there's not as big as an issue that people want to assume there is. However, there are issues. And just like I was just saying, like, there are people within law enforcement that just shouldn't be cops. Without a doubt. I mean, there's an LAPD officer recently that was just accused of fondling a dead lady's breast.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, so I see that. Then I saw the other day, there's a picture of some correctional officers that had their hand up giving the image of the Nazi symbol that they use when they put their hand in the air. And this is a correction facility. So there are definitely some bad officers out there without a doubt. And I've always prided myself of I'm not afraid to speak out against the bad officers.
Definitely.
And I have taken criticism to that in a certain way because people are like, why are you doing this? But I'm a realist, and so like I said, when one of the vows I made with myself when I became a cop was I'm not going to forget who I was before I became an officer. And so if that means that I have to stand up for what's right, then that means standing up for what's right. And that's kind of why I started my organization, because we need some type of transparency between law enforcement and the community, and there's not a lot of organizations that exist to do that right now.
Yeah, no question. I always feel, and some people just, I guess it depends on the person, but for me, every time I read the news or I just read something, I always think to myself, of course, obviously my values start to come into play, and you automatically, you just read it in like one way. But, me being aware of who I am, what I believe in, but also what's out there, is we have to wrap our head around the whole thing and know that there's always probably more sides to the story.
100%.
You know what I mean? I mean, why is it that people are automatically just making assumptions right away? It's just interesting because your profession, I respect it a lot. I feel like it's definitely undervalued. I mean, I'm sure you could agree with this. Like firefighters get like all the
praise,
all the praise,
taking kitties out of trees until they get the praise.
Yeah, but
that was a shout out. That was a knock on my fire homies out there.
But I mean, I don't know. What are something simple steps people can do to not be forced into that box of thinking, I guess you could say?
So one of the things that I teach in every single one of my seminars that I present is get as much information as you can before you make a judgment call. There's something trending, you probably seen on social media. There's a guy that got beat up by police officers, like really, really bad. I've gotten hit up like multiple across like 7 or 8 requests just to speak out on this. And the thing is I haven't found a lot of the research behind it yet. And so one of the things I do is I try to get as much information as I can before I speak out on anything.
Of course.
So I actually do something on my social media platform called Tillman's Take, which is what I do. It's just kind of giving information as to, from my training and experience and also my personal opinion about the situation. But all that information that I put out is based on research that I've done about the incident. Unfortunately, what we've become in society, we've been ingrained to think that everything needs to be like microwavable. Everything needs to be, in a toaster. Like we want things now. And social media, phones, everything has contributed to that. In many ways, it's good because it makes us a little bit more faster. But in a lot of ways, it's detrimental because it makes us want to get information like quickly without doing the research. I mean, you think about it back in the day, like when I was growing up in school, I mean, we had encyclopedias. And so if you had to do a report, I will never forget, man, having to go to the encyclopedia, having to go to the dictionary, whatever it may be, to do this huge long report. But one of the things it taught us was to go and research and research and research. Well, now all you got to do is if I say Siri, my phone will pop up right now. You know what I mean? So that's how quick things are, is like you don't even have to type anything anymore. You could just say Siri out loud and Siri automatically pops up and says, how can I help you? So I think we can't have that same approach when we're trying to get information about some of these critical incidents. I mean, and again, don't get me wrong, like I'll be the first one to call a bad cop out, but at the same time, I'm not afraid to call out the good officers for doing the right thing and the ones that have been, judged by, hundreds of thousands of people.
Do you show, because like we just talked about it, right? Do you show a little empathy for the way, I guess, law enforcement's looked at? Because again, just the way social media, the media puts it out there, like you said, it's microwavable, it's a story, it's hot. And I almost feel like, I'm not going to lie, I almost feel like, man, like I could see you, I kind of can't blame like maybe an uneducated or a misinformed person to look at it that way just by the way it is. I mean, do you sometimes kind of show, you obviously have empathy for the law enforcement side, but do you also show the empathy?
100%. 100%. Example of that one. There's a video that happened 3 years ago. Alton Sterling was killed in New Orleans, and he was killed for, the call was he was selling CDs. Officers showed up. That they said that the guy had a gun in his pocket. Officer showed up, basically told him to take his hands out of his pocket. He didn't go with the program. Ultimately, Alton Sterling ended up dead. He was shot 6 times in his chest. If you watch that video, you'll see the officers, or you'll hear the officer say, take your hands out of your pocket or I'm going to effing put a cap in your head. Like, this is what they're saying repeatedly. Yeah. Like, so they're telling him, hey, I'm going to put an effing cap in your head. They're cussing at him, all this other stuff. And so when you look at it from the perspective of a civilian, you almost interpret that situation as like those officers had a plan to kill this guy from the jump. Yeah. Like that's how it looks. And a lot of times when viewers watch these videos, you're viewing it from an emotional standpoint. Of course. Because the stuff is everything is attached to emotion. So it's not pretty to watch. I mean, think about it. It's never pretty to watch anybody die or get murdered. Hurt. Yeah. But the crazy part about it is you have a natural urge to watch it. It's the weirdest thing. Yeah. Like, even though you don't like to see it, but people have a natural urge. I was just on a dead body like 2 weeks ago, and I'm sitting there guarding the house or whatever, and the guy is behind me, dead on the floor. So a family friend comes over, and he wants to know what's going on, and you could just sense like he wanted to go in and see. And it's like knowing he's automatically making judgments. Knowing that he's dead, but he wants to see what it looks like. And so people want to see these videos because they have this urge that they don't even know why they have it, but at the same time when they see it, they get emotionally attached to it. So I always tell people, emotions don't think, they react. And so when we watch these videos, you got to realize like you're not thinking, you're reacting. And so I teach people, slow down your reaction and take up your thinking a little bit, because you got to understand what led up to the incident. So if we go back to the Alton Sterling one I just brought up, what you'll find is that it was a justified shooting. And not only did the law enforcement find it justified, but the civil rights activists found it justified because they responded to a guy. He had a gun in his pocket. They ended up recovering a gun in his pocket. Alton Sterling was not going with the program. He was not listening to their commands to take his hands out of his pocket. And so ultimately they used deadly force. But the thing is those officers' approach should have been better. And the reason I say that is they didn't have to come up there and tell Alton Sterling to take his hand out of his pocket or they're going to F it pop a cap in his head.
Yeah.
Because that makes you seem like, oh, wow, like they had a predetermined plan of what they wanted to do. So I say all that to say this is that, you know what, when we look at these videos, slow it down, do as much research. But I do empathize with the community because a lot of this stuff ain't easy to watch. Man, if I use force, it's not easy to watch. Like there's a reason we don't watch war on TV or television or TV or social media because it's not easy to watch. Like
things are rated, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Think about our freedoms right now. Like we have a lot of freedoms that are afforded to us in the United States of America, but yet we don't see what had to happen in order to have this freedom that we have.
Yeah.
Like you ever think about it like that? Like think about all the freedom we have here in this country, but think about the things that were done in the name of freedom.
Yeah. That's why I feel like it's so important that people actually watch or get educated on history because there's so much stuff that people don't realize they're taking for granted. At least this is my opinion about our freedom, you know?
Well, if you think about it, think about this too. I mean, at night, most people go to bed around like 9, 10 o'clock. But when they go to bed, there's somebody up working graveyard hours, me, that's policing our streets to make sure that the crazy people that are out there doing drugs, breaking in your stuff, don't do that.
Yeah.
But yet we forget that. And that was what I forgot. I didn't realize that before I became a police officer. I took it for granted that I got to go to bed and go to sleep and wake up and not have to worry about nobody that broke into my house.
Yeah.
So if nobody's out there finding these people, then you know, what kind of world are we going to live in then? You know what I mean?
You know, I find it interesting that you brought, I want to bring this back up when we were talking about, you know, the way people view, like a civilian might view a video and how we get attached to it. It's funny because I almost feel like it's so dangerous if we look at a video or if we look at an article, whatever it may be. It's dangerous because of the way we might interpret it and how that just, you know, it spreads like a virus. But at the same time, it's also dangerous because if we don't look at it too, it's almost like as if we're not being educated. You know, we're not aware of what's going on in society. You know what I mean? That's interesting. But let's kind of go back to your story just a little bit. So when you got into law enforcement, I'm curious to know, like, how did it all work out? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you got in there, and then you know all that stuff happened with Ferguson, right? How did your career, like, what department did you start in, and you know?
So I started for Chino Police Department. I got in, and when I got out of training, that's when I told you, like, I started actually seeing the benefits of what law enforcement did.
Yeah.
Ferguson happened, and so that's when, you know, I truly believe it was divine because I woke up one morning and God just gave me this plan and said, this is what I want you to do. So what that was I created a presentation where I go out there and tell people who I am, my story, where I come from, talk about why I got into law enforcement, talk about the training I received, and then I put people through scenarios on stage in front of all their peers that what we deal with out on a daily basis as police officers. And then at the very end of the presentation, we talk about those scenarios, and then we do a Q&A session. And that's called the Initiative Workshop. And that workshop, man, took off like wildfire.
Wait, that's to the general public or to schools or what?
It started in churches. So I was doing it in churches I started in churches. I was doing it to general public at a church setting. And then from there, I got the opportunity to go do the same workshop for some high school students in Riverside. So when I did that, there was a lady there who was like, oh, wow, like, I love this. The kids loved it. It's funny, man, because you see all these kids that say they don't like cops, but yet in my presentation, when I put them in the scenario as a cop, they all want to be a cop.
They love it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they were like, man, like, this is a phenomenal presentation. And so that was actually when I got my first contract to go and do the same presentation in schools all over the place. And then from there, it just evolved into doing more presentations about anti-bullying, diversity. And then that spawned to us holding a huge conference where we bring law enforcement educators together. And then that spawned to us doing after school programs. Right now, we have about 6 after school programs where I hire police officers to go teach students about law enforcement and also just being a good civilian. And then now it's spawning to me. We had our podcast, which we created about a year ago called It's Needed. And then that has also led to now me educating people on how to get into the profession.
So is it safe to say that it is clearly more, because obviously Breaking Barriers United, it initially started off in trying to bring that connection back and that trust between the community and law enforcement. But now what I'm hearing, it's safe to say that it's actually more than that, right?
It's
Because you're focused,
way
yeah, because you're focusing on community. You said you
way bigger than
schools,
that.
you're focusing on bullying, and then
Way bigger than that,
now
man.
you're in the place of actually training and helping other law enforcement, officers are aspiring
Yeah.
law enforcement to educate them and things like that. Um, yeah, you have a pretty big team now, right? With the
It's pretty
organization.
decent. It's pretty decent, man. We got I got my guy. I have a marketing director who does all my social media stuff. He follows me around, does all my presentations. I have a small film crew, but a film crew. We actually just launched a production company, so we have BBU Productions,
Nice.
which is centered around creating recruiting videos for police departments to get new officers in there. And so yeah, our team is growing, man. It's that's why. So when we talked about at the beginning of this episode, the entrepreneurial side of things, like people don't realize that I have a full-fledged business behind the organization.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What started out as me just doing a presentation has now evolved, and now I'm speaking all over the country, man. I'll be in Florida. I was in Colorado last week. I'm going to Michigan, going to Oakland, going to Chico State. So yeah, speaking all over the place
That's
too.
awesome. It's funny how you had that entrepreneurial I guess blood or that spirit inside you. You went into a profession and then now it's like all coming back. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, never. And
Same
now,
thing with me.
and I think that's where God. That's for me. Where I always bring God back into it is like, that was God's way of saying like, look, I'm gonna fulfill the desire that I gave you to be an entrepreneur, but I'm gonna do it the way I want to do it, not the way you initially thought you were gonna do it. Because
Yeah.
the way I initially thought I was gonna do it, I was gonna create like some type of tech, some mobile app or something like that, just something. And there were some good ideas, but that's not what God wanted.
God wanted
So
for you
God
to.
was like, I'm going to allow you to fulfill your entrepreneurial spirit, but you're going to do it the way I want to do it because there's a bigger need. And
Yeah.
that bigger need is to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. So that's why, people wonder why I have success. Well, it's only because of God. And that's because I've been trying to stay focused and fixated on fulfilling his plan for my life.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to know when you first started the whole idea of Breaking Barriers United, what was the initial response from, I guess, the public and then also on your side, the men in blue, you know, on your colleagues basically.
So from the public, man, it was great, man. I had a lot of people that were anti-cop or on the fence that were like, I'm not necessarily a naysayer of cops anymore. And I always tell people like, look, my job is not to make you team police. Like I'm not
Yeah.
trying to make you a freaking hoorah. I'm all
Like
about
Team Iron Man, Team
yeah,
Captain
exactly.
America.
Yeah, I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to get you to have a thin blue line sticker on your car.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
God, my job is just to get you to see things a little bit differently. The response from within the organization was a little different though, because you got to realize like law enforcement is a very traditional profession, enriched in
Absolutely.
there's a lot of positivity, but there's also negativity as well. And so when you see somebody coming in that's trying to go against the norm, go against the status quo, and at that I'm a minority, it almost irks people a little bit. And then on top of that, you're facing people that are just envious. It may have nothing to do with my race. It may have nothing to do with me doing something different, but just envious that I'm having success. So I would experience some hate, man. And like, what's funny is like in my mind, I'm doing something to actually help police officers out. So that way, the next time that they're in a critical incident, somebody maybe just thinks about Breaking Barriers United is like, what, maybe that officer is not like the rest of them. So, and realistically, I'm helping them out, but yet I felt like I was still being hated on because I'm having success. So, but more than I do, EJ, like people, you're going to have your haters. Anytime you have success, there's going to be a trail of haters behind. And so I'm glad I experienced it early, because now I don't really worry about what the hater's going to say. Somebody's always going to have something to say about something. Like I can argue with somebody and tell them that the sky is blue and they'll find 101 reasons to tell me why the sky is black. So I just got to realize like there's just certain people that just don't want to actually come to the truth.
Yeah.
And so when I realized that, man, it didn't stop me. I was like, I'm just going to keep pushing. And then you also got to realize too, that a lot of people, it's just popular not to like police.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people out there that don't like police and they don't even know why they don't like police.
Yeah.
It's just
they just
popular.
joined the popular.
Exactly. So that's the unfortunate part.
With all the success you're having now and how much it's growing, do you still find colleagues and peers and other men and women in blue still hating, or has it grown? Like the support on that side grown?
I will say, so my support amongst law enforcement is phenomenal. So I don't want to
Awesome.
get confused. Like my support amongst people in law enforcement is tremendous. I know I have haters. I just think that my haters have kind of gone into the closet a little bit, and I think that's more so because of the success I've had.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of to give somebody, if they're whoever's listening to this podcast, to give you a little bit of hope from the entrepreneurial standpoint, is that one thing you have to realize is that you have to prove people with your actions sometimes.
Yes.
Like you can do all the talking in the world. You can say I have the cure for cancer, but until you actually show the cure for cancer, you're not going to get people to support you. So I have a lot of haters, but they're supporters at the same time because they know what I'm doing is a good thing and they've actually seen it proven in my work. They're hating only because it's natural. It's a human inclination to hate sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I just give you that hope out there if you're listening to just realize, like, you know what, go out there and make people believers of your work. And at the very beginning, and I don't hate on people. I'm not mad at people for doing what they did, because think about it. Like when I got hired as a police officer, I was only a year and a half on, maybe that, when I had this idea for this organization. So the way they take it is they got a guy coming in here who's never been a police officer before. He wants to come in here and start changing things up, and he don't even know his day job. So in their mind, they're like he hasn't even proven himself yet.
Yeah.
So I've gone out, I've done the work on the street, I've done many different things from a police officer standpoint that would make me, I guess, credible. But at the same time, I've made my business credible because of my work ethic and my grind. And so that's nothing you will ever be able to refute. And so, if you're out there with a business and people aren't giving you the support you need, or they're not giving you the motivation you need, forget it. Screw them. Like, don't worry. Like, go out there. You can control you. Like nobody else can control that. You can control you. So go out there, hustle, and make people believers, because you're only going to make them believers by the work you show, not by what you say.
Yeah, I think this is an important point. Then talking on the entrepreneurial side, I think what a lot of people, once they see the hate, they kind of get really set back. They get scared, and then they turn back. I think what you're doing is amazing in the fact that that you already accept, and and you're comfortable with that. I cannot change everybody's mind and thoughts on law enforcement, but at least if I could somehow just put a little drop of perspective into their mind, then at least you're doing something.
That's
like
it.
you're
That's
working
all you
towards
need. That's
it, right?
That's all you need. And I don't want people to get think that I've conquered haters, because I haven't. Like I had somebody last week, first time ever, that actually criticized me for my presentation. I've been doing this presentation for 4 years, and I've had nothing but rave reviews. And so it was actually kind of a little bit of good humble pie for me to realize that you're still going to have those naysayers. And this person was like adamant about how they thought the presentation was inappropriate and so forth and so on. The funny part about it is they still want me to come back and do another one. That's the funny part about it. But, all that to say is that it's good to know, and it's good for people to bring you back down to earth and realize that, look, everybody's not going to like the food that you make.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't care who it is, but everybody's not going to like it. You know what I mean? Your food may be bombed your whole family, but there's going to be a neighbor that's going to be like, no, your food ain't that good.
It's like, it's a little salty, but I'm still going to eat it.
A little salt, exactly. So don't trip. Don't trip. You know what I mean? Just realize, like, keep grinding, keep hustling. Don't worry about it, because haters will be haters.
I think also, no matter what you do, whether you start a business, you start a movement, you're trying to make a change, regardless, you will always get somebody to respond because of an insecurity of some kind.
100%.
Especially,
100%.
I mean, this is obviously law enforcement, and it's a huge deal, and what's going on. It's a pretty emotional, touchy subject.
100%. Very emotional.
I'm curious to know also, let's talk about we're talking about the public and society's perspective, and you're doing a lot of work on the law enforcement side as well. What are some of the things that maybe like rookie, I don't know if that's the correct term to use, like maybe like beginning law enforcement, or just your peers and colleagues in general are not doing to help the situation, besides the obvious headlines, right? If they're doing like the stuff that's always on the headlines, obviously, and it is like in your eyes their fault, obviously, that's the apparent. But what are little things that you think that they're not helping to contribute to this change?
Two things. The first would be slow things down. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of the mistakes that are being made in our profession are not necessarily because a police officer had a desire to go out there and hurt somebody or take somebody's life. It's just more so a lack of, training or a lack of tactics. And usually that lack of training and lack of tactics always comes back to, them moving too fast. Mm-hmm. So if you can slow things down in your profession, I've even done it myself. When adrenaline gets going, you just start moving, don't even realize what you're doing. And we have to remember that we are making decisions that can affect somebody's life, both mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Yeah.
So slowing things down will actually help them, maneuver through doing their day job. But I think the most important thing that, if I had to give a tip for somebody, was be empathetic towards people. Show empathy. I was just having this conversation with somebody yesterday because she thanked me for being patient. I was on a call. Her son was having like an emotional breakdown. He's going through some type of psychosis, and we were on the call, man, for like 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours, man. My back was hurting from standing up, all that weight, hanging on me. But I was just being me. I was being Ryan. So I'm talking to him about life and everything. And so, as I'm doing that, at the end of it, she's like, thank you, Ryan, for just being so patient. And one thing that I realized, and I was telling her this, is that, as police officers, sometimes we get so caught up in just going from call to call to call to call. And it's easy because that's what our job is.
The tunnel vision. Yeah,
it's easy. Like you go from one call to the next call to the next call to the next call. And then what ends up happening is like if I came to your house today for a situation involving some family members, for me as the officer, it's just another call. But for you, this is the biggest thing in your life right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so right there, immediately, you got to realize there's a disconnect between the community and law enforcement.
Yeah.
And the disconnect is for the officer, it's just another call. But for you, it's everything. And so as officers, we have to remember to be empathetic, to what's going on. And that also goes back to slowing things down. Mm-hmm. If you slow down and you put yourself in that person's shoes, then you're probably going to have a different response to the way you treat them. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest lessons my dad taught me when I was younger is, treat everybody like your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, you name it. Because if you treat them like that, then you'll treat them the way they should be treated, not the way that, they don't want to be treated. And so by saying that, I tell people, just remember to have empathy. But from the civilian side of things, we also appreciate empathy from you, because what the civilian doesn't understand is, like, for example, man, like I've been back on patrol for about 2 weeks now, because before that I was a school resource officer. Mm-hmm. For 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks, I think I've gone on about 4 or 5 dead body calls.
Wow.
Like, that's a lot of times to just go experience death.
Yeah.
For anybody. I mean, the average person in life doesn't experience death that often.
Unless they're in your line of duty or my line of duty.
Exactly. They don't. And so, but me seeing death, and one was an overdose, one was an alcohol poisoning, the other one was a heart attack or something like that, and young people.
Yeah.
So when you see that, and then I come to your house for something petty, like, just remember, like, you don't know what that officer's going through either.
Yeah.
And so that's
seeing a lot more than what you probably think.
Exactly. So it's a two-way street, and that's why our organization is so important, is because you got to realize this is a two-way street.
Yeah.
Like, officers need the public, but the public also needs the officers. And so empathy is probably the one biggest advice I can render to anybody, whether it's police officer or civilian. If you show empathy towards the person that you're dealing with, the odds are you're going to probably have a good contact with that person than a negative one.
I like exactly what you said, and for everyone that's listening, what Ryan's basically saying is there's definitely a difference in the vibration, and I know he knows all about that, being in the entrepreneurial space, that sometimes when there's a difference in vibration, there's obviously a huge disconnect, and there can't be no synergy, and there's obviously going to be tension because of that. Always. I'm also curious to know as well, just being like, with your line of work and what you're doing, there's obviously a lot of false claims out there, maybe a lot of generalizations. What's one I'm very curious to know, like, and a lot of these questions actually are from curiosity. Yeah. Is what's one that kind of just strikes your nerve? Just the false claims about your profession, or
I would say that the one that always strikes my nerve the most is, you did this because I'm black, or you did this because I'm Hispanic, you did this because I'm white, or whatever it may be. Yeah. It's a race thing. Don't get me wrong. Now, don't get me twisted. There is racism that exists in this country.
Absolutely.
There are people that are prejudiced. There are people that have implicit and explicit biases. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this next statement I'm going to say is not me not acknowledging those things because they do exist. I've
There's a
experienced it
problem.
myself.
Yeah.
But to say that everything comes down to race just irks my nerves.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the claim that I can't do it because I'm black. You know what I mean? I can't have success because I'm black. Well, I'm living proof that you can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm black.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So to say that you can't have success is a false claim to me because I'm living proof that you can. Nobody gave me $1 million and said, hey, Ryan, go out and do this with me. Like, I had to earn everything. Now, is it harder? Maybe harder or something like that? Maybe.
Yeah.
Depending on who you're dealing with. But like I said at the beginning of this podcast, is like, you can control what you can control. So stop utilizing excuses. The other thing is that everybody assumes that as police officers, we go out there and make decisions based on race. We don't. Like, a lot of people don't understand that we get calls for service all the time. Mm-hmm. Like, let me put something in your mind. Let me put something else in your mind. It's like, I go on a call because somebody said there's a suspicious person in a park. Now, mind you, I told you earlier, I was called on a few times saying I was suspicious, and it made me pissed off.
Yeah.
But now on the flip side of it, as an officer, I go to a call because somebody calls and said there's somebody suspicious in the park. So as a responding officer, I show up, I see you. Let's say you're the suspicious person. I talk to you. I show empathy. We're cool. We chop it up. We're good to go. But what neither of us realized is that the person that called was racist. How would I know that?
Yeah.
How would I know if the person that called was racist? Mm-hmm. How would I know that the person that called said they see somebody, a Filipino guy in a park, and they don't like Filipino guys, and so they call the police just saying he's suspicious and he's foreign to the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So yet the police officer shows up not knowing that the call was generated based on race.
It's exactly what you said. The person is reacting to
exactly. So we as the officers become the doormat of somebody else's racism.
Yeah.
And it's not right. And so again, there's not much you can do about it. The only thing you can do about it is have empathy. Now, if that officer shows up and treats you like a dirtbag and he's disrespectful, that's something different. Then yeah, that's something you gotta talk to a supervisor with, whatever it may be. But we can't always assume that you're getting pulled over or whatever it is just based on race, one, and two, don't discount other racist people that are having cops doing their dirty work without the cops even knowing it.
Yeah. You know, there's one thing that I know you preach so much about, and that's transparency, mm-hmm. right? I mean, aside from the transparency that you're trying to, you're establishing, obviously, with your work, I mean, how does someone, even if it's maybe within family or within their business, I mean, what are some tips that you feel that how people could establish that transparency with those other people they're trying to build that trust with?
Honestly, man, just don't forget where you come from. And, one of the things, it's funny, I was speaking at a law enforcement event on, what day was it? Monday. Mm-hmm. It was all a big law enforcement event. It was actually a government event. It wasn't just law enforcement officers. There was other people from government, for hospitals and everything. Everybody in there is in a suit and tie for the most part, or uniform. Man, I show up in my Concord J's with some jeans on, my BBU shirt on, my BBU hat on. And now, don't get me wrong, there's the time and place where I'll wear the suit and tie if I need to, but I've been able to stay true to myself, you know what I mean? And I've taken criticism for that. Just because, and that was one of the things that irked me when I first got into the profession, is just because I'm not what you typically view another police officer as doesn't mean you need to criticize me. Yeah. People would make fun of me because I wear my hat backwards, or like today I came in here with some tight pants on. Just because it's foreign to them, they don't know how to embrace it. So if you want to develop that transparency with people, man, just be true to yourself. Like, don't let anybody affect you being you. You know what I mean? When you start being fake, people can sense fakeness. And I think that's the only reason why we've been able to have success as an organization, is because I'm going to keep it 100 with you. Like, now the one thing that does irk me is that, like, people will want me to come out, like, let's say a cop shoots somebody last night. Mm-hmm. And, I do Tillman takes and things like that, but they want me to come out right away and say, judge this officer, criticize what's going on. Mm. Like, you got to realize, I told you, like, I got to do my research first. And some people, sometimes, again, going back to the microwave effect, people want things in a microwave. It's like, it don't come out that fast. Like, if somebody goes to commit a murder today, just a regular civilian, it takes that trial for the whole thing is going to be at least a couple years. But yet you want to crucify an officer overnight. So just
let it thaw, right?
Yeah, let it thaw out. Man, take the chicken out, let it thaw on the counter for a little bit. Stop the one to throw the chicken in the microwave, because then you're going to get, E. coli or whatever it's called, man.
Yeah. It's and this is really random, but this is the honest truth. When you were on the way here, I was just scrolling through my Instagram, and George Lopez, the comedian, mm-hmm. he posted a video of, I think, a gentleman. He was on the floor, and I guess there were law enforcement or cops or whoever may be using excessive force, And of course, you see like these top comments, right? I get all the likes. And the comment that the guy put was, "Police are a public health threat." I mean, dude, like, what's your response to that, man?
You know what? The person that said police are a public health threat, why don't you do this? Go live in a neighborhood with no police. Throw some criminals in your neighborhood, and then you come back and tell us how much of a health threat we are. People need the police. The police need the people. There's a guy by the name of Sir Robert Peel. He was one of the founders of modern day policing. And in his 9th pillar, he said, police are the community and the community the police. That's one thing that I embrace. I never forget that I'm a member of the community. But we can't sit here and act like we can live in a world free of police.
Yeah.
Like, one thing that the community and the public don't understand, and there are some very sick, twisted people out there.
Absolutely.
When you go on calls, we had a call the other day where somebody had actually committed some type of sexual assault on a child. Like, we have some sick and twisted people out there, and you get rid of the police, and now who's going to be the defense for that? You get put in just yesterday, too, there was another video. There's video after video. There's a video of some guys that robbed a jewelry store in Florida somewhere. They stole a UPS truck, getting a shootout, and they end up killing one of the UPS employees. Like, there are some people out there that are going to do some dangerous things. So you imagine taking the police out of the community. Imagine how much more you're going to see crime increase. Yeah. Because now there's no defense. And so the person that says it's a public health threat, that to me is a troll, or that to me is somebody that's uneducated. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're living in this false sense of reality when not even realizing that when they go to sleep, the reason they can sleep peacefully is that's because there's somebody trying to protect them from getting into their house. And at the end of the day, despite that person's ignorant comment, despite that person's ignorant beliefs, if you called the police tomorrow and you lived in my community, I would still show up to your house and serve you, because that's what I'm called to do. I'm not called to go down to your level of ignorance. I would still come and serve you even if you didn't want to be served.
Yeah, it's the same thing at the hospital. I mean, we have to treat patients regardless of what we know about them, what got them there, and what we're treating them for. I think, though, we're talking about the person that made that comment. I promise you, that was like so random when I just read that. I was like, man, I want to bring this up and ask him. But I think it starts from the top. And I think it's a huge disservice that people within that power, within that platform, such as a celebrity or somebody who's posting a video, and this doesn't even have to be in regards to this, just anything in general as far as perspective. I mean, there's so much I want to talk about just on that freaking Peloton commercial. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah. But I think it's so unfortunate that people have to, use their platform. And there's a difference to me if someone says, wow, just saw this video. It's very unfortunate if, what's happening here. There's more information that probably needs to come to light, but there's a problem. Now, if it's worded like that, then cool. But when you're coming out straight up like, this is illegal, something needs to be done, like, and then you're in that power, and then you get all the people just going there because it's cool, like, let's jump on the bandwagon. And I just think it's a huge disservice to the public, man.
So the co-host of my podcast, his name is Anthony Johnson. Really good brother. He's like a brother to me. His name is Ejay. He's it's a popo on Instagram. He has 100,000 followers. Man, that dude is so invested in his community. It's not even funny, man. Like, he really pours into the community and does a lot to make sure that people understand that we're all humans. So about 2 months ago, or 3 months, probably longer than that now, 3 months ago, he had a situation where he was on a call. Some guy got in some officer's face, basically took a threatening posture towards the officer, and AJ went up to him, punched him in the face, and they took him into custody. That video went viral. Not even knowing the circumstances, it just went viral. You had celebrities from left and right posting things like, this is a sheep in wolf's clothing, or this is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Also, not even knowing what AJ's done. Yeah. And so the thing that irks me so much about those situations is people forget the type of platforms that they have and the type of influence that they have.
Yes.
And so when you're not educated, or when you make ignorant comments, you may realize, like, let's just say, like, let's take George Lopez, for example. I don't even know the context. This is not even referring to that video he posted today. But let's just say that he came after the fact and found out that the officers were completely justified. He's already put it out that this was all bad, the cops are terrible, and all this other stuff. And so he's already affected the minds of millions of people. Even if he came out later and said, oh, they were fine, he's already fueled a fire that's already burning.
But he ain't going to do that.
No,
he's just going to take it down and that's it.
Exactly. And so people don't understand that having influence on social media comes with the responsibility.
Yes.
And that's the one thing that I don't like about social media is that people don't take that responsibility serious. They have unfiltered mouths, and then when they put stuff out there, it influences people because we live in a microwave society, that's the only information that they're going to get because it's quick. And now because they got it because it's quick, now this is what my views are or opinions are on this situation, as opposed to going and doing further information. That's why I can't stand people that go on there, especially celebrities, and make certain comments without doing their research. I don't mind you going out there and putting out stuff on social media if this is how you truly feel about a situation or a circumstance, but make sure you've done your research before you start putting blanket statements out there, because you're really influencing a society, an entire community.
Yeah, not even the community. I think the next generation, because there's a lot of youth that looks up to these people.
100%.
You know?
Yeah, when I do presentations for kids all the way down to 9, 10 years old, and one of the first questions I ask is how many people don't like the police, and a majority of the kids raise their hand. And the funny thing is, the majority of those kids have never had a negative interaction with law enforcement, but yet they've had a negative interaction with law enforcement on social media, and that's why they don't like us.
Interesting. So is it kind of like how many people don't like cops? They raise their hand, and then is it like another question of how many have you actually had an interaction with a cop?
Yeah,
and it's like 0.
Yeah, the hands go down.
Oh my god.
Exactly. So that's why I'm saying, like, influence is crazy, and people don't take their influence seriously. They don't take it responsibly. And so, it's social media is great. It's a wonderful tool, but yet it's also very detrimental if we don't use it in the right way.
Damn, man, that's terrible, man.
It is, man. It is.
Let's talk about community. I'm all about community. You spoke about it a little bit, and also with Ejay, right? How important is it? I mean, to me, what you're starting is an uphill battle. Obviously, it's something that's probably going to take a lot of work to do. But obviously, I admire what you're doing. How important is it to start with your community?
100%. We need to start with the community because,
whether in regards to a change or a business, whatever it is,
we need to start with the community, because the more, it's funny, man, like, even though it is an uphill battle, like you said, but the more people catch on, the more people I can educate, the more people my team can educate, the more that downward spiral now turns to an uphill, climb. And so, I've noticed just in the short time we've been doing this, that people's minds have been being changed. Rome wasn't conquered in a day. And if Martin Luther King gave up at the first person that told him he couldn't have freedom, then we wouldn't have freedom today. So there's a lot of people that face, tribulations, but at the same time, we can't quit. We need to use that to energize us. There's a movie out there called Harriet. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but
yet.
if you're listening to it, it's about the story of Harriet Tubman, the lady that ran the Underground Railroad. It's a phenomenal movie because it's based on how she didn't compromise her faith in her, aspirations to free slaves and be free herself. And so if you give in to that first moment of adversity, then you're basically essentially sacrificing not only your own life, but the lives to come after you. So, I have 3 kids. And so I'm trying to leave a legacy for them. So when their dad is gone, I want them to not only be able to step into the role or the shoes that I've created, but I want them to be able to move my work forward and say, and when they walk around, people will be like, yeah, I know exactly what your dad did. And your dad is the reason I'm able to accomplish this, because that will inspire my son to continue to go out there and continue that work forward. So it's not just about, doing something for the sake of getting likes or followers. It's about doing something to leave a lasting impression on our society.
Yeah, that's awesome. Obviously we know where your work is going. You spoke about like the schools you're speaking at, all the speaking engagements across the country. Where else is you trying to take this movement, your organization, Breaking Barriers United? Well, what else is up in,
So I mentioned the guy, Sir Robert Peel, earlier. My goal, and I always say this, my goal is to change the face of modern day policing. Sir Robert Peel came up with his 9 pillars of community policing back in the early or late 1800s, early 1900s, I believe. And so if they considered him the father of modern day policing. But the interesting thing to me is, like, if he's a father of modern day policing and he was, alive in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Well, that modern day is a lot different than the modern
There
day
needs
today.
to be an update.
Exactly. There needs to be, update 2.0 or whatever, iOS, 10.0.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be an update. And so I want to literally change the face of modern day policing. I want
awesome,
people
man.
to see law enforcement differently. I want different people that have never even considered themselves to be police officers to become police officers. I always tell people the best law enforcement recruit is a person that doesn't even know they want to be a police officer yet. That's the best person for the job.
Interesting. Why is that?
Because for me, that was me. And I had no aspirations of becoming a police officer.
Okay.
And so because of that, you're going to be able to come into a profession not already being so biased
and shaded
towards thinking that everybody, you know what I mean? So if you come in with an unbiased view on things, then when you start to do some enforcement type work, you're going to do it with an unbiased approach.
More than likely, you're going to be like a good fit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, my goal, and mark my words, man, the day I leave this earth, man, people will say, man, he changed the face of modern day policing, and we're doing it in so many different ways. I mentioned our production company. I mentioned the after school programs, the training modules that we're creating. We're gonna, it's gonna be big. It is already big. It's gonna be real big.
Dude, that's awesome, man. So as we wrap up the podcast, though, I forgot to start my timer. To be honest, I don't know.
We all good.
We can just keep going.
Yeah, we've been vibing. I'm good.
Dude, you know what? One of the things I wanted to ask you that I feel is very, very important, at least for myself, is lots of times there's a lot of people who have an urge or feel like they're obligated or just want to start change, but something like you're doing, like we just mentioned, is clearly an uphill battle, right? But other people, not like you, get discouraged by that. How can somebody be motivated and encouraged to spark change, to start a movement when they are facing such an uphill battle?
The why has to be bigger than the uphill battle. And what I mean by that is the reason why you're doing something has to be bigger than what the uphill battle is. Because if your why isn't bigger than that, the moment you face adversity, you're going to stop. So for me, the why is my wife. My why is my kids. The biggest why is God. So all those reasons why I do what I do outweighs the negative ridicule that I'll face. And so if your why isn't bigger than any of those, then you need to reevaluate what your why is. And when you really figure out what your why is, and it's at that point, you can go out and do whatever you want to do. There's a book called The Success Intersection. And one of the things it talks about in this success intersection is it talks about where your talent and your passion intersect, you'll find your sweet spot. And so a lot of you guys might be struggling with how to have this success, not even realizing what your talent is or what your passion is. So the first things first is you need to identify what you're talented at. Once you identify what you're talented at, then you got to figure out what you're passionate about, and then try to figure out a way to have those two things intersect. The biggest example I use is like, if I'm a basketball player and I'm passionate about basketball and I just love basketball, that's my passion, but I'm 5'2", my talent's not going to intersect with my passion, because at some point in time, I'm not going to be able to go out into the NBA because just by mere size alone.
Yeah.
But if I have a passion for basketball, but I'm also talented at managing or coaching or running a basketball organization, now my passion for basketball can now intersect with my talent, which is running an organization or coaching. And so now you're going to find your sweet spot and be able to go to wherever you want to go. You can become a coach, you become a manager, manage an organization, whatever it is, that's where they intersect. So for me, I discovered my talent, which is public speaking. My talent is, ideas, creating ideas and running a business. But my passion has always been changing as far as changing the community, changing law enforcement. So those two things intersect. And that's, I think, why I've been able to find my sweet spot. So if you need some motivation out there, 1, discover what your why is. 2, discover what your talent is. 3, discover what your passion is. Mix them all together and you'll find the secret to success.
Dude, I love it, man. It's the same thing with me, with the podcasting. And I think we were talking about this earlier. It was something I never thought I would do. Initially I just wanted to try something different. I consider myself a serial hobbyist, and next thing you know, it's evolved. So I at least from what Ryan said, and on behalf of myself, I think sometimes too is also just trying new things as well, because you never know what you might fall in love with in trying new things. You have to put yourself out there, and you may identify, like you said, you have to identify what you're passionate about and what you're good at and your strengths. And sometimes you're not able to do that unless you try things.
I agree 100%, man. And so just stay motivated out there, good people, man. We're all in this battle together. Everybody, every single one of us possess God-given gifts. It's as biblical, that's biblical. He's given each and every one of us a talent. But at the end of the day, what are you going to do with those talents? Are you going to bury them and wait for the master to come back? Or are you going to go out there, take those talents and compound them and then come back and present the master a whole bunch of talents? And so we all have talents. What are you going to do with it?
Absolutely. Dude, Ryan Tillman, y'all, I appreciate you coming on the Perils. Do me a favor. Let everybody know where they could find you if they want to reach out to you. And also, if anybody wants to perhaps book you or interested in, your organization, Breaking Barriers United, where can they find you and get in contact with you?
Most definitely. So Instagram handle is going to be Breaking Barriers United. So follow us on there. Give us a follow if you have any questions. DM me. If you want to book me to come speak at your organization, whatever it may be, just email me at info@breakingbarriersunited.com, and I'll have one of my assistants get back to you as far as setting that up. And then also our website is breakingbarriersunited.com. So those are the three main places. Oh, and then two, listen to our podcast. Our podcast is called #It'sNeeded. So it's a phenomenal podcast. Ejay, we got to have you on, man. We got to exchange a favor, man. I'd love to have you on, man. But yeah, it's needed, man. So follow us on there. We're on every single major platform where podcasts you can find. So Spotify, iTunes, you name it, we're on it.
And just real quick, you touched on it in the beginning a little bit, but in case people do want to book you, to speak, you do more than just enlightening them on.
Yeah. So I do more than just change your perception about law enforcement in the community. That is one of the biggest things, and I promise you, if you have me out for that, because you'll enjoy it. But I do presentations on anti-bullying. I do presentations on diversity, and I do motivational presentations just to motivate and encourage people. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different things we're doing, man. It's fun. And, if you want me, reach out to me soon, because my calendar is been crazy off the hook. I was just telling EJ before we got started today, in February, first week of February, I'll be in Florida. I'll be in Michigan, Oakland, all in the same month. And remember, I'm still a full-time cop too. So yeah. Got to manage it.
We're both busy, so I'm going to schedule my podcast episode with him for maybe May or June.
Let's do it.
As long as it's locked in, right?
Let's do it. We lock you in, man. Let's do it. So
everyone, I appreciate you guys for listening and watching the Parables. Do me a favor. If you know this podcast or maybe even this episode can impact somebody's life, maybe give them some perspective, enlighten them, things like that, do us a favor and share it with them. Also, if you're listening to this particular episode, let me and Ryan know that you're listening.
Please.
Tag us and we will reshare it and show you love.
Yes, I will show y'all love. I'll show y'all love on the gram and whatever it else. And yeah, if you do, man, please follow the Parables podcast. I mean, this is good stuff right here. This is real good stuff, and it's just an honor to be here. So, everybody needs encouragement. Everybody's at a place in their life where they can get better. So listen to the Parables. If you want to get better, listen to the Parables.
I appreciate it, man. The last thing I have all my guests do, they sign the infamous canvas.
Oh, I'm going to do it. That's dope. That's dope. I like that.
I appreciate you guys. Parables podcast with Ryan Tillman, the legend. Yeah. Let's go. Best dancer.
Yeah, hey.
I keep saying that, guys, for everyone who doesn't get it. Just Google his name and probably a video of him dancing at a high school, right, when you were SRO.
You'll pop up.
The guy got some moves, man.
It's all right. But
I think he's the one that retired MC Hammer.
Hey, you know what? Don't hate on your boy. Parables
podcast. We're out of here.